On the day of the funeral, my phone buzzed only once. One message, 3 words. Don't come, please. It was from my brother's widow. No explanations, no room for argument. Just a quiet command wrapped in trembling fear. That morning, I stood outside St. Mark's Cemetery, watching from a distance as mourners moved past the gates in black coats and silence. I wasn't one of them. I wasn't allowed to be. My name, once carved into birthday cakes, spoken in laughter across family dinners, was now passed around in whispers. Whispers that avoided eye contact. Whispers that carried blame. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a brother. I had become the reason behind a tragedy no one could talk about directly. I watched as they lowered the casket into the earth. My brother. My only brother. We shared bunk beds as kids, stood side by side at our parents' funerals, and once swore, after a drunken Christmas night, that no matter what came between us, we'd always show up for each other's endings. But here I was, uninvited, unwanted. The pain didn't come all at once. It rolled in slowly, like winter frost on a window, quiet, numbing. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear through that crowd and ask, "How dare you?" But I didn't. Instead, I stayed at the gates, hidden in plain sight, watched his coffin disappear beneath the soil. I clutched the folded letter in my coat pocket, the one he'd written to me months before the accident, still sealed, still unread. I couldn't bring myself to open it. Not yet. A group of distant relatives passed near me. They didn't look, didn't even hesitate. One of them muttered something under his breath. I caught just a piece of it. I shouldn't be here. Maybe they were right. Maybe I shouldn't have come. Maybe grief has rules now, rules about who deserves to mourn and who doesn't. But I paid for the suit he was buried in, the casket, the service, the flowers, every cent, quietly, anonymously, not for credit, not for forgiveness, just because I loved him, even if they never let me say goodbye. Friends, let me pause for just a moment. Please tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Have you ever experienced something like this in your own life? If this story touches you, consider subscribing and sharing the video. It truly helps us grow this channel and bring more stories like this to light. Now, let's continue. The sound of the funeral bells followed me home like a shadow I couldn't shake. They rang out across the city, low, deliberate, unforgiving. Each toll wasn't just for the dead. It was for the exiled, too. For the forgotten. For me. I closed the curtains, turned off every light, and sat alone in the silence I had never asked for. The chair across from me, the one he always claimed during Sunday visits, now stood empty. My mind replayed it all, the way he'd laugh with his whole body, shoulders shaking, hands flying in the air like punctuation, the way he'd call me kid, even though I was the older one, the way he'd lean in during serious moments, as if his presence alone could fix anything. But now, there was nothing to fix, only absence and silence. Grief doesn't announce itself. It creeps in. It sat beside me in the quiet, pressed its weight into my chest until breathing felt like a betrayal. I wanted to cry but didn't know how to begin. The kind of pain that comes when you've been pushed out of mourning is different. It's raw, tangled, and cold. It doesn't feel like grief. It feels like punishment. They had buried him without me. And yet I paid for every part of it, quietly, without ceremony, without a name attached. That was the only way I could be there, for him. Not physically, not with flowers or eulogies, but with the dignity he deserved. I made sure his hands were clean, the coffin was strong, the service was worthy. I made sure no debt would follow him to the grave. But none of it was enough to grant me a seat by the grave. Not in their eyes. I pulled out the letter again, the one with his name in the corner, still sealed, still daring me to face whatever words waited inside. I traced the edge with my thumb, as if contact could substitute for courage. But the weight of my guilt kept it closed. Because what if it wasn't forgiveness inside? What if it was blame? I wanted to scream, not at them, at myself, for letting the silence grow so loud between us in his final days, for not calling more, for not fixing what was broken, whatever it was, before time ran out. The house felt like a museum of memories I wasn't ready to tour. His jacket still hung by the door from our last fishing trip. Half of a whiskey bottle still sat on the shelf, waiting for a night that would never come. Even the chair creaked as if it expected him to walk in and sit again, but he wouldn't, and I would never be allowed to speak his name without someone remembering I wasn't there. Not because I forgot, but because they told me not to come, and I listened. A week had passed since the funeral I wasn't welcome at, and grief had settled into my bones like winter cold. It wasn't loud anymore. It was quiet now, almost polite, the kind of sorrow that just sits with you in the corner and refuses to leave. I had stayed silent for too long, long enough for the anger to harden in their hearts, long enough for love to be rewritten as guilt. And now, sitting at my desk with shaking hands and a blank sheet of paper in front of me, I knew I had to say something. Even if no one was asking, I wrote slowly, not just to explain, but to confess. I poured out what I had never dared to say when he was alive. That I should have reached out after our last argument. That I hated how we left things on a voicemail and not a handshake. That I still remembered the way he held my shoulder the day our father died. Like he was the older one, like he was silently saying, "I've got you." And now he was gone, and I had no one left to tell him. He always had me, too. I wrote about the funeral, how I stood outside the gates, about how it broke me, about how I knew they blamed me for things I never meant. I told them I wasn't asking to be loved again, just understood. I begged, not for permission, but for space to grieve, for a sliver of grace. I folded the letter with care as if it were something sacred. I sealed the envelope and walked it down to the postbox myself. That walk felt heavier than any before, like I was carrying years of silence in a single envelope. And then I waited. 4 days later, it came back. Same envelope, same seal. But now with a red stamp smeared across the front. Returned to sender. It hadn't even been opened. My heart stopped when I saw it, not because of the rejection itself, but because of what it confirmed. I had been erased, not just excluded, not just blamed, but deliberately shut out, as if my grief was counterfeit, as if my love didn't qualify anymore. I held the unopened letter in my hands for what felt like hours. The same words I had poured my soul into now sat unread, unwanted, unacknowledged. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, hollow, because that letter had been my last attempt to reach across the canyon. My last chance to stretch trembling fingers across the silence and hope someone would take my hand. But the silence only deepened, and this time it had a return address. And maybe, just maybe, forgiveness was something you had to earn before it could be given. Or worse, maybe it was something that in some families was never offered at all. I hadn't planned to return to the family home, but grief has a strange way of pulling you back to the places that once held warmth, even if that warmth has long turned cold. My mother's voice on the phone had been brittle. "Your things are still here. You should come for them." No emotion, no invitation, just a practical sentence loaded with centuries of silence. The house hadn't changed. The same creaking step near the hallway. The same faded portrait of us 3 boys above the fireplace. Me, Michael, and James. All smiles, all promise. A photo taken long before anyone knew which one of us would die first, and which one they would quietly blame. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. The shift in the air, the unspoken tension, the way voices dropped as I passed, as if mourning could be edited to exclude the parts no one wanted to remember. Eyes slid away, cups clinked louder than necessary. Conversations carried on without me, as if I had entered a version of my family where I no longer existed, but the whispers still found their way in. "He never really showed up for Michael, you know. He always kept his distance. I heard he was driving the night of the crash." None of them said it to my face. They didn't have to. The walls said it, the cold glances said it, the avoidance, the forced smiles, the fact that no one offered me coffee or asked how I was holding up. Not even my mother. It wasn't just grief in that house. It was judgment. It clung to every picture frame and every old piece of china, like dust that had never been wiped away. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a villain, and I had arrived right on time. I walked through the halls that once knew my footsteps as a boy, barefoot on Christmas mornings, sneakers pounding during school runs, polished shoes clicking before weddings. Now each step felt like an intrusion, like the house itself rejected my presence. I found my childhood room untouched but faded. My old baseball gloves still hung by the bed. A stack of letters I'd written to Michael in college sat in the drawer, unread, unopened. I didn't know whether to laugh or break. I stared at the floor and remembered the last time we'd argued. It hadn't been about anything important, something about responsibilities, about being tired, about not showing up when he needed help fixing the porch roof. He'd said, "You're always too busy for real life." I'd snapped back, "Not everything revolves around your crises." We never apologized. Life got in the way. And then death made it permanent. Now that one moment had bloomed into a story far more sinister. Now to them, I was the absent brother, the cold one, the one who left and sent money instead of showing up, the one who didn't answer the phone when it mattered, the one who surely had to have done something for all this pain to make sense. The need to defend myself surged in my chest. I wanted to grab someone, anyone, and scream, "You don't know what happened." I wanted to tell them how I paid for the hospital bills, how I'd been the one on the phone at midnight arranging palliative care, how I'd fought insurance companies behind the scenes while they cried in the living room, how I loved him even when he made it hard. But I didn't say a word, because they weren't listening, not really. The walls of that house weren't made of brick anymore. They were built from stories, stories that made them feel better, stories where I was the shadow and he was the saint. And in that version, there was no space for complexity, or grace, or truth, just blame. I picked up the box with my things and walked out the door without saying goodbye. No one noticed. And maybe that was the part that hurt the most. They mourned my brother's death, but somehow they buried me with him. I wasn't supposed to be in his study. They had boxed up most of his things already. His suits, his cufflinks, the books he underlined and dog-eared to the point of fraying. His widow had left the door ajar when she stepped out to speak with the lawyer, and I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the need to feel close to him again, just once. Or maybe I was just searching for something, anything that could explain why it all went so wrong. The room was dim and untouched, as if time had paused the day he died. The faint smell of cedar and ink lingered in the air. His old desk still had his notepad open, the pen resting exactly where he left it. Half a thought was written across the page. "Tell him." And then nothing. A single dash of ink, like a breath, interrupted. I sat in his chair and let the silence wrap around me. My fingers moved across the drawer handles without thinking, opening each one gently. Receipts, worn business cards, random keys, an old birthday card from our mother, and then, tucked in the very back of the bottom drawer, behind a stack of unopened mail, was an envelope with my name on it. Just my name, nothing else, no date, no explanation. The handwriting was his. I knew it instantly, the slanted, sharp letters, the way he always pressed too hard on the M. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at it for what felt like hours before my trembling fingers dared to touch it. And then I opened it. The first line undid me. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say what I should have when I was alive." His voice flooded back into my mind. I could hear him saying it, softly, awkwardly, never good at emotions, but real. He wrote about our last fight, how he regretted it more than he ever let on. He said he never stopped loving me, that no matter how far apart we drifted, I was still his brother, his blood. "I got scared," he wrote. "Scared of dying, scared of how angry I'd gotten. I said things I didn't mean. I pushed you away when I should have pulled you closer. And then came the line that made my chest collapse. They think you caused it, the accident. But you didn't, and I never told them the truth." I froze. The room seemed to tilt. My heart pounded against my ribs like it was trying to break free. He went on. He explained that the night of the accident, he'd been driving alone. He was the one who'd refused to let anyone come pick him up. Even though he'd been drinking, he'd had a fight with his wife and stormed out. I had offered to come get him. He told me not to. He'd insisted. "You tried to help?" he wrote. "I told you I was fine. I lied. I was angry, stubborn, and tired of being the one who always needed help. And now, you carry the blame I never cleared up." Tears blurred the words. I pressed the letter to my chest, as if it could undo the years, the coldness, the exile. He knew what they thought of me, and he let them believe it. But he wrote this. He wanted me to know. Maybe he thought he had more time. Maybe he thought he'd tell them himself. But time doesn't wait for confessions. I looked up at the walls, now closing in around me. This wasn't just a letter, it was a key to truth, to reclaiming the name I thought I had lost forever. But it was also something more painful than I was prepared for. Because if he had told them, if he had cleared the air before the funeral, would they have let me stand beside him one last time? Would I have been allowed to mourn as a brother, not a ghost? Would they have embraced me, not buried me with suspicion? I held the letter tighter. I wasn't sure what to do with it yet, whether to show it, or to keep it between just him and me. But one thing was certain. The story they'd built about me wasn't the whole story, and maybe now. It was time they heard the rest. The letter's final pages trembled in my hands as I read the words that made my chest tighten. Someone had quietly paid every last cent. Not just for the funeral, elegant oak casket, polished brass handles, the lilies that smelled of both sorrow and hope, but also for the hospital bills that bled my brother dry in his last days, the debt collectors whose calls he never told me about, the lawyer's fees for the settlements he fought so hard to arrange. My breath hitched. I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my heart, feeling the weight of unseen kindness suffuse the room. Who could have done this? Who would sacrifice in silence to spare a family already fractured by grief? I scoured the margins of the letter for a hint. Nothing. No name. No hint of identity. Just those simple, jagged lines of ink that spoke of love, guilt, and an unspoken promise to protect us even beyond the grave. My mind raced back to the days after the accident. I'd scrambled to arrange emergency surgery costs, wrestled with insurance adjusters at odd hours, emptied savings accounts I'd been saving for my own future. I'd watched my brother's savings evaporate faster than tears on a pillow. I'd assumed he'd handle what he could on his own, but he hadn't. Someone else had carried the load. I thought of my mother, stoic, weathered from decades of worry, but too proud to reveal vulnerability. I thought of our cousins, distant, polite, but never close enough to step in. I thought of friends we barely remembered. None felt likely. Then the hollow ache in my chest sharpened. What about the one person who had reasons to keep the truth hidden? Someone who stood to lose everything if my brother's mistakes were made public. Someone whose own heart might ache at the thought of blame shifting away from me. His widow. I remembered how her eyes glistened at the funeral, so close to tears and yet so distant when I watched from the gates. The way she politely refused my letter, the way she had excused herself when I stepped inside her house, the way she wore his watch on her wrist, as if time itself was the only thing she could never reclaim. Could she have been the one? Had she paid to protect me, or to bury secrets that reached further than our family's fractured memories? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves? The thought of this hidden benefactor settled around me like a vigil light in the darkness. I cradled the letter and let tears slip free, tears of relief for his love, tears of anguish for all the hidden burdens we'd never known, tears of fierce determination to unearth the truth. Because secrets this powerful don't stay buried forever, and neither do the debts of love they represent. Clutching the envelope, I rose from his desk and stepped into the silent hallway of the house I once called home. Each step echoed with possibilities, and with the promise that the kindness shown in shadows would soon see light. I would find out who paid those debts, and I would make sure their sacrifice didn't vanish into silence again. I spent nights immersed in paper trails and whispers, my world reduced to bank statements and faded signatures. By day, I haunted the funeral home's back office, feigning interest in floral arrangements while scanning ledgers. By candlelight, I traced fragmented numbers. Invoice here, bank transfer there, all marked paid in full. But no name, only codes and reference numbers that led to locked doors. The church offered no sanctuary. In the hush of the pews, I approached the secretary, feigning condolences, searching for a clue in her sympathetic eyes. She fingered her rosary beads and murmured, "Everything was handled discreetly." Her pity stung. I pressed for details, for the smallest scrap of a name. She only shook her head, sorrow etched on her face, then slipped away into the confessional's shadows. I dove into our family's accounts, digging into years-old statements. There, an unassuming wire, the same amount as the funeral bill, the same dates as my brother's last hospital fees, traced to an unmarked trust. I tracked it through several shell accounts until it funneled into one final record. MS. 2 letters that felt like a punch in the gut, like thunder in my chest. MS, the initials of the person I never suspected, the person whose betrayal I'd feared most. Memories flooded back, her quiet composure at the graveside, the gentle way she refused my letter, the pale blue of her eyes when she whispered, "I'll take care of everything." She had always navigated storms with a calm I mistook for indifference. But this was fierce devotion hiding behind a veil of propriety. A love so profound she'd shoulder every burden to protect us. I sank to the floor of my brother's study, the envelope clutched to my heart, the weight of her sacrifice pressed down, a mixture of awe and guilt cascading through me. She had chosen to carry the shame and the cost alone. Every sleepless night, every quiet tear she refused to let me see, had been part of this silent vow. My hands trembled as I realized what this meant. She wasn't hiding from me, she was shielding me. And now, armed with the truth, I faced a choice. Expose her generosity to a family that had shut me out, or honor her sacrifice by giving her the respect and gratitude she'd withheld until now. In the stillness, I whispered her initials like a prayer. MS, not just a set of letters, but proof that love can live in silence, and that redemption often comes from the one you least expect. I found her standing alone by his headstone as dusk settled, the sky bleeding purples and grays. The lantern we'd released weeks ago had long since drifted into memory, but here she was, my mother, her silhouette bowed as if the weight of the world pressed her shoulders down. My heart pounded like it would tear itself free, and my legs felt as if they had forgotten how to carry me. I stepped forward, each footfall a question. When I reached her side, she didn't turn. The wind stirred her hair, and I could see her fingers clutching empty air where grief had taken residence. "I know," I said, voice small against the hush of the cemetery. She flinched as if struck. Finally she looked up, her eyes rimmed red, not from tears, but from long-buried guilt rising to the surface. I hadn't known how much she carried until that moment. Years of silent trembling, of strained smiles over family dinners, of furious late-night phone calls I'd never overheard. "I did it," she whispered. Her words landed like stones sinking in deep water. "I paid for everything." My breath seized. The twist of relief and heartbreak surged at once. Relief that someone had believed in me, heartbreak that she had suffered alone to protect me from the family's wrath. "Why?" I asked, though I felt the answer coil around my ribs already. She closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. "Because I knew you didn't deserve their blame. I've watched you fight for him, his treatments, his doctors, his last wishes. You never stopped. You were the voice he needed." Tears rolled down her cheeks, and for a moment I saw her not as the unshakable matriarch, but as a frightened woman, terrified of losing us both. "I couldn't bear to see you crucified by rumors and whispers," she continued. "I thought if I carried this burden, it might heal you, or at least spare you more pain." Her confession cracked something open inside me. I dropped to my knees beside her, brushing my fingers across the cool stone of my brother's marker. The name carved there didn't feel complete until her truth filled the hollow spaces around it. "I should have known," I murmured. "I should have looked for you." She reached for my hand, and we stayed like that, two wounded souls, kneeling in the fading light, sharing a sorrow we'd never spoken aloud. The world around us receded to nothing but the hush of grief and the tremor of forgiveness beginning to stir. In that moment, I understood the depth of her love and the cruelty of secrets kept in the name of love. The past lay between us like shattered glass, jagged and sharp, but now, with her confession, we could start gathering the pieces. Standing, I pressed my forehead to the stone, tasting the coolness of truth. "Thank you," I whispered, not just for paying the bills, but for believing in me when the world refused. She wrapped her arms around me, and I let her, letting the tears fall for my brother, for our fractured family, and for the bond rekindled in the very place they'd tried to bury us both. In the gathering night, I realized confronting the past was just the beginning. What came next would be rebuilding together. I woke the next morning with her words echoing in my soul, as if the dawn itself carried the weight of her confession. The house felt different, hollow yet hopeful, every corner alive with the promise of truths at last revealed. I wandered through rooms filled with echoes of our past, memories both beautiful and bitter, woven into the wallpaper like ghosts waiting to be acknowledged. My brother's study called to me again, the place where his final letter had changed everything. I returned to the desk, laid his envelope flat, and traced the familiar slanted ink. For the first time, I didn't feel its weight as a burden, but as a bridge, stretching from his silent love through my mother's sacrifice to whatever lay ahead. I stood there, heart pounding, and realized how long I'd carried others' judgments, as if they were my own. Whispers had shadowed me through hallways. Rumors had corroded my name until I believed I was that man, the careless brother who caused a tragedy. But their story had been incomplete, a half-truth spun in darkness. Now, with the full story in my hands, I felt something stir, a flicker of hope, fragile as dawn's first light. Could I step back into the light of our family? Could I reclaim a place beside them, not as the villain they'd painted, but as the brother they'd lost? The question trembled on my lips, heavy with possibility. I thought of every memory they had used against me, the time I missed his college graduation, the argument we never resolved, the nights I worked late and couldn't answer his calls. Those moments felt different now. They weren't proof of my indifference, but of two flawed people drifting apart under the weight of life. And love, unseen, unspoken, had endured behind the scenes. My chest tightened with both fear and longing. It wasn't just about clearing my name. It was about forging a truth stronger than the lies that had bound us. I pictured walking back into the family home, letter in hand, revealing the kindness that had sustained us all. I imagined my cousins' stunned faces, my aunt's startled tears, my mother's cautious relief. The thought sent a thrill through me and a tremor of dread. What if they refused to believe me now? What if years of silence had hardened their hearts beyond repair? But then I saw my brother's handwriting again, each curve of ink a testament to a bond that death couldn't sever. And my mother's eyes, filled with guilt, yes, but also with fierce love. If they could believe, maybe I could dare to hope too. I left the study, resolved. This chapter of my life would not end in exile. I would carry the weight of truth, not as a burden, but as armor, proof that love and forgiveness could outlast every whisper of doubt. I would reclaim my place, step by trembling step, into the circle of those I loved. And in doing so, I would honor my brother's final words and my mother's hidden sacrifice, ensuring that the story they began in secret would be told in light. That afternoon, the air was thick with summer's humidity, and the willow's long, draping branches brushed the ground like soft fingers. I found her, my sister-in-law, standing alone, her back to me, as if she were keeping vigil. The gentle sway of her shoulders told me she was crying. I approached slowly, heart pounding so loud I thought she might hear it over her sobs. I didn't knock or announce myself. Instead, I simply stood beside her beneath the canopy of leaves, sharing the shade and the silence. "I have something you need to see," I said softly, offering her the envelope that carried 2 confessions, my brother's final letter and my mother's admission of sacrifice. Her head jerked toward me, tears still shining on her cheeks. She hesitated, then took the papers with trembling hands. She unfolded the letter first, reading every line with care. The initial shock crossed her face, sharpened sorrow, relief, regret. I watched her jaw tighten as she saw his words. The truth of that night, his own guilt for pushing me away, his love that never wavered. Then I handed her my mother's words. She swallowed hard as she read how my mother paid every bill to protect me from the storm of blame. I witnessed the release of 1,000 held-back tears as the reality settled in. 2 acts of love, hidden in fear, colliding in her hands. Her shoulders shook as she let out a long, shuddering breath. She raised her head and looked at me through swollen eyes. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" she whispered, her voice cracked by grief. "Because I believed what they said," I confessed. "I thought you wanted me gone. I thought you blamed me for everything." She shook her head, tears trailing down her face. "I blamed him too," she admitted. "I was so consumed by my own pain I couldn't see anything else. I was angry. At him. At you. At life." Her hand found mine, cold and trembling. "I'm so sorry." We stood there, 2 broken hearts mending in the quiet under the willow's boughs. No more whispers, no more walls of silence, just the shared understanding that grief had blinded us all. I drew her into an embrace, holding her as if I could squeeze away her sorrow. She leaned into me, and I felt the tremor of her grief mix with relief. In that moment, we weren't brother-in-law and brother-in-law's replacement. We were 2 souls bound by loss, reaching across the wounds to find each other again. When we finally pulled back, she brushed a tear from my cheek and nodded. "We'll face them together," she vowed, her voice steady with newfound resolve. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds, I realized that tonight, under the shelter of willow and truth, we had begun the reckoning that would bring our fractured family back from the shadows. Under the soft light of her kitchen lamp, we spread out every piece of evidence like fragments of a shattered mirror, desperate to see the whole reflection. Hospital reports, police notes, his final text messages, each detail glimmered with a truth we'd never allowed ourselves to face. There was no darkness in his death, no secret hand guiding tragedy, just a night steeped in fear, adrenaline spiking every decision until logic blurred at the edges. We discovered that after their argument, he'd stumbled into his car with a bruised shoulder and a pounding head, convinced he could drive home. He'd called for an Uber, then canceled when he saw a familiar sedan pull up. Mine. I'd left the engine running too long in the driveway that night. He'd honked once, twice, then drove on, muttering under his breath about deadlines and deadlines missed. I never knew. Then came the skid. Rain-slick asphalt. A guardrail he clipped with a sickening thud, though he kept going, too stunned to stop. His phone pinged with a final alert. Low battery. He slowed, tried to pull over, but the curve came too fast. His car spun, and in that blur of metal and rain, help arrived too late. There was no villain in that story, only choices made in panic, in stubborn pride, in the dark of night when regret has the sharpest edge. We saw how whispers so easily mutated, grew wings in shadowed hallways, fed on guilt until they became something monstrous. He abandoned him. He left him for dead. None of it true, all of it born from fear and the need to blame. As we traced each step, our grief softened into understanding. I wept for the brother I lost and the brother I never truly knew. She wept for the husband she loved and the man she thought she'd betrayed. And together, we let the tears wash away the lies that had bound us. When the final piece fell into place, his canceled Uber ride, I closed my eyes and whispered his name into the silence. The weight I'd carried for so long lifted in that moment, replaced by something light and fragile. Forgiveness. Not just for each other, but for ourselves. For believing stories instead of asking questions. For letting grief harden into blame. We embraced then, two souls freed from the tangle of accusations. Outside, the night held its breath, as if honoring our release. In the gentle hush, I felt him beside us, no longer a ghost in the margins, but the brother whose final truth had set us free. And in that freedom we discovered the true path to healing, honesty, compassion, and the courage to unravel every lie until only love remained. The day I sent the group message felt like stepping onto a stage in front of ghosts. "Family," I wrote, my fingers trembling. "I've uncovered truths that change everything. I'm ready to talk, if you are." Silence answered first, then small flickers of life. My cousin Mark, the one who always avoided Thanksgiving dinners, was the first. His text read simply, "I'm sorry. Can we meet?" A flood of relief and fear washed over me. I didn't know if I could trust him, but I knew I had to try. We met in the same church basement where my brother's service had been held. He came with tears in his eyes and arms open wide. He pulled me into a hug that squeezed away years of distance. "I never knew," he whispered. "I just knew I didn't know how to help." That night, he told me about his own regrets. Advice he'd meant to give but never did. Advice he'd bottled up under the weight of pride. We talked until the candles burned low, forging new memories from the ashes of the old. Over the next days, messages trickled in, some hesitant, some joyful. My Aunt Camille arrived on our doorstep with a stack of casserole dishes, her arms full of home-cooked hope. She wept as she pressed a pan of lasagna into my hands, saying, "I missed you at the table." My uncle, the stern patriarch who once declared I was no son of his, left a voicemail. "Let's bury the past and build a future." His words, timid but sincere, broke something open in my chest. At family gatherings, the air shifted from awkward glances to genuine laughter. Stories that once ended with blame now began with shared grief and ended in solidarity. We remembered my brother not as the spark that ignited our conflicts, but as the thread weaving us together. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood at the head of the same table where so many arguments had begun. Plates were passed around, forks clinked, and voices rose in warmth. My mother caught my eye across the room, a tired smile on her face, and I realized the circle had closed. We were still imperfect. Some wounds wouldn't heal overnight, and a few relatives lingered in the old shadows of resentment. But the walls of silence had cracked, letting in light and the promise of new beginnings. As I raised my glass in a quiet toast, I felt the weight of the past lift. We had been divided by grief and blame, but united by truth and forgiveness. And in that unity, I heard my brother's voice echo softly in my heart, reminding me that even when we falter, love has a way of bringing us home. The dusk air carried a gentle chill as we stepped onto the pebbled shore of Willow Lake, my brother's sanctuary and now ours by his spirit's silent invitation. Moonlight danced on the water's surface, turning ripples into rivers of silver that stretched toward the horizon. We formed a loose circle, arms brushing, hearts beating in a shared rhythm of remembrance. My mother held a lantern in trembling hands, her face awash with both sorrow and something brighter. Pride, perhaps, that we had found our way back to one another. My cousin Mark knelt by the water's edge, smoothing pebbles as if arranging memories in precise order. My sister-in-law stood beside me, her grip on my arm gentle but determined, a testament to the bond forged in our shared grief and truth. One by one, we spoke without speaking, letting the lanterns carry our stories skyward. I pressed my lantern's wooden frame, etched with his initials, and watched as the flame flickered to life, a small beacon of hope in the gathering twilight. I thought of the laughter we shared as kids, skipping stones, racing boats, pretending the lake was ours alone. Those memories, once buried beneath layers of blame, now surfaced with crystalline clarity. Around me, tears glistened on cheeks like morning dew. Each lantern took flight with a soft whoosh, rising above the trees in a constellation of golden hope. With every ascent, I felt the weight of silence lift, replaced by the warmth of understanding. The lanterns soared together, a silent choir of light that carried our love, our apologies, our promises of remembrance. I closed my eyes and whispered his name into the hush. The cool breeze responded as if carrying my words across the water to where he rested. In that moment, I realized that honoring his memory wasn't about perfect rituals or grand gestures. It was about the simple act of gathering, of sharing breath and tears and stories, so that his life, with all its joy and its mistakes, lived on in ours. As the last lantern drifted toward the stars, we lingered on the shore, letting the night envelope us in its quiet embrace. The lake, once a silent witness to childhood adventures, now bore witness to our healing. In the soft glow of remembrance, we found a path forward, one that carried his legacy not as a burden, but as a bridge connecting our hearts forever. The lantern's glow painted her face in molten gold as it drifted upward, and in that trembling light I saw him, my brother, smiling back at us, not with the hollow smile of memory, but with that crooked, knowing grin he wore when he believed something impossible had just become real. In that flicker of flame, I felt his presence wrap around us, warm as a summer breeze. Beside me, my mother's hand tightened around mine. I could feel the tremor in her fingers, the echo of every secret night she lay awake, weighing the cost of her choice. In her grip was the confession of 1,000 unspoken words, the silent refusal to let blame crush the only son she still had. I remembered how she'd watched me at the funeral gates, how she'd carried the burden alone, how she'd paid every cent so I could heal without shame, even when the family cast me out. All at once, the initials MS leapt off every ledger, every receipt, every hushed whisper I'd chased through bank statements and funeral home files. They weren't the cold letters of a distant stranger. They were my mother's, the one who had loved me first, the one who had secured my place in this world with her sacrifice, the one who had always believed I was worthy of mercy. A wave of emotion crashed through me, awe at her devotion, sorrow for the night she suffered in silence, gratitude deeper than I had words for. In that moment, I saw the gift she had given, not the money that paid bills, but the unwavering faith that family, even when fractured by sorrow and suspicion, could still choose love over blame. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I watched the lantern climb, a single point of light rising into the velvet sky. It carried with it all our regrets and all our hopes, our apologies and our forgiveness, bound together in that fragile paper shell. And as it floated beyond sight, I felt the fractures in my heart begin to mend, joining bone and spirit until only the pulse of belonging remained. I turned to my mother and pressed my forehead to her shoulder, feeling the steadiness of her breath, the certainty of her love. The night air was cool on my neck, but inside me burned a fiercer warmth, the knowledge that truth, when uncovered, could heal even the deepest wounds. That love, when brave enough to bear the cost, had the power to lift us from our darkest moments and guide us home. In the hush that followed, we lingered under the sky, two souls bound by blood and revelation. No more secrets, no more silent sacrifices, only the quiet promise that, from this night onward, our family would stand together, united by truth, anchored by forgiveness, and carried by the unwavering faith born from the greatest gift of all. The night sky swallowed the last lantern's glow, leaving only the hush of our shared breaths and the gentle lap of water against the shore. In that silence, I felt a weight lift from my chest, a burden I'd carried since the moment I stood outside those cemetery gates, barred from my brother's final farewell. Betrayal had once chained us. its cold links forged from blame and unspoken truths. But now, under the canopy of stars, justice felt more than a verdict. It was the restored promise of love, spoken in voices that had once turned away. I looked around at the faces ringed by moonlight, my mother, her eyes bright with relief, my sister-in-law, her hand resting on my shoulder, cousins and aunts, each bearing the softer lines of forgiveness. Even those who had clung to old resentments now offered nods of understanding, their arms open in welcome rather than judgment. The divide that once yawned between us had narrowed until it vanished entirely, replaced by something stronger than blood, the bond of shared healing. We stood there until the cool air pressed us toward our coats, and I realized I had never felt so seen, so known. The echoes of gossip and whispered accusations had faded, drowned out by the chorus of our own truths. No longer exiled from my family's story, I reclaimed my place at the hearth, the table, the circle of hands joined in both sorrow and celebration. In that moment, I thought of my brother, his stubborn laugh, his fierce loyalty, the way he had believed in me even when the world refused. His final words had been the spark that ignited this reckoning, and his love had guided us through the darkest hours. I whispered his name into the night, letting the breeze carry it to wherever he rested, certain that he felt our collective embrace. As we walked back to the cars, footsteps soft on the grassy path, I carried with me the certainty that we had rebuilt more than family ties. We had reconstructed trust. We had forged a legacy of honesty that would outlast every rumor and every secret. We had transformed our wounds into bridges, spanning the chasms that once threatened to swallow us whole. And beneath that vast, star-strewn sky, with hearts renewed and burdens lifted, I knew that justice was not merely found in clearing one name. It was born in the courage to uncover truth, to forgive freely, and to choose belonging over blame. Together, we walked forward into the promise of tomorrow, the echoes of our unity ringing louder than any funeral bell carrying us home.